heard a fact. I was at a conference in Silicon Valley. On Facebook, the #1 university self-reported was Hogwarts University. So not always the greatest information, but it can still be very predictive. Descriptive statistics. You can go to a bunch of different companies like Wyland and you can rent data, you can overlay data onto your customers, you can do descriptive statistics, understand their demographics, who they are, what they're all about, their lifestyle, their interests, things like that. But the focus of my conversation today is to talk about predictive analytics. So it's data science. Science has kind of been invented in the last 8 to 10 years or so. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning. Fundamentally, that's predictive analytics, and it's actually been around for a really long time, and it's been around for a really long time in the marketing context as well. I started my career back in the early 90s at Sears. This was the logo. I was about 6 years old when I started. And we used to do all this types of marketing here. 65 million Sears credit card holders. We were doing all the full line catalogs, Christmas wish book. Those of you that are old enough remember the wish book. But we did a lot of other things that is very familiar to what this conference is all about. The lower right-hand side, continuity programs. We did direct mail continuity programs for jewelry and other products where you'd buy for the low price of $7 a necklace, and then the next month you'd get another matching brooch. The next month you'd get a bracelet, so forth and so on. And we were using predictive analytics and people-based marketing to do all of that type of work. In fact, my very first model that I ever built was for an Orc vacuum cleaner, $300 in the mail. Pretty expensive, co-marketed to the Sears credit card file. We mailed a sample of some 800,000 Sears card holders, used all of the data that we had on those individuals to understand of about the 800 to 1,000 people that responded to that offer and actually bought the vacuum cleaner. Built a predictive model to understand what are the characteristics in terms of our Sears data that would indicate a response for likelihood to buy so that we could target our mail more effectively and save costs in the mail. So this type of concept is still out there for people-based marketing, even in the digital world, and I'll talk in a little more detail about that coming up. So marketing objectives, driven by analytical solutions. This scale that kind of goes on the top from brand awareness all the way down to loyalty. If you think about it, you can build a predictive model to measure and track all of these types of things. We can build models to get more clicks on a website. We can build models to get people to go into a store. But most often what we're doing is building predictive models to actually drive response, to drive revenue, and to drive loyalty. So at the bottom end of that spectrum, what's really important, I heard this a few times in various talks yesterday, trying to understand that break-even point. How many boxes do you need to ship to break even on a prospect or to approximate a break-even point? We can build models not to predict just who will respond to your marketing offer, but actually build models to identify response and then making it to the second, third, or fourth month in a shipment so that you can recoup your marketing costs on acquiring a customer. What does that look? As a data science guy, I got to have some graphs in the presentation. So what we're trying to do with people-based marketing, on the y-axis here is response rate, and audience reach is along the x-axis on the bottom line. As a modeler, we're trying to shape this curve. We're trying to concentrate the number of people who are likely to buy your product on the left-hand side of the curve, have higher response for fewer people mailed. We can save marketing dollars by not targeting to people who are unlikely to buy. So we're trying to drive up response. And what you can do is identify what your response rate, how much money you need to make in that marketing promotion to break even. And in this example here, it shows a 1% response rate gets me to that break even point. So I can market that many people, kind of intersect the curve from my predictive model with my break even point. And now I know exactly who I can target and who I should stay away from. So keeping in mind, predictive analytics, predictive modeling is all about concentrating the best responders so that I can market efficiently and not waste money by targeting those people that are never going to buy my product. So another chart here, this is kind of tying it to revenue, just again showing the same concept that I can understand if I need like 90 cents to break even on average for every marketing piece that I put out there, whether it's a digital piece or a direct mail piece, I can identify that point. Typically, and I heard this talked about yesterday, typically when you're prospecting, you're going to prospect at a loss. You're going to have a cost to acquire a customer. So you're not going to actually market to this break-even line. You might go below it with the hopes of once you've acquired a customer, you can then monetize that customer and drive lifetime value to those people. So you have a certain cost to acquire, and it's a very important concept, I think, for a lot of the folks who are running a business, with subscription boxes to think about. So this type of database marketing and direct marketing has been around for decades. An important point to note that clients who've been doing this type of work historically drive all their profitability from their customer file. You can build predictive models on the customer file to identify who you should be remarketing to and who you shouldn't, and you're driving all the profitability from it. So those same concepts on the previous slide where I talked about marketing to a break even or a cost to acquire can be done on the customer file. But if you want to return value to your investors, what you're going to do is market at a point above break even and then drive profitability. So the question for you in the room is, are you able to remarket to customers with your subscription box service in such a way that you can drive profitability? Or do you have to market in a prospecting sense to drive profitability because you don't have a good follow-on product or set of products to go back to the customer file against? So when we were thinking about this talk, we wanted to try and understand and prove out this a little bit with some anecdotal data. We actually went back and we looked at the attendee list from last year's conference in 2018. So there was 199 unique subscription companies that we could identify. And we wanted to kind of categorize them a little bit. And this is very informal kind of research that we did just from looking at the list and like basically going through and looking at websites and trying to find all of the companies. We broke them down first of all into what we would call consumables versus non-consumables, and then there was 8% that was in an other category, mostly entertainment. So the consumables were in the food, the beauty, and the home categories. And the non-consumables were, kind of broken down into two different areas: a one-time buy, high value, probably not going to buy that service again, versus a repeat buy. It was subjective, but that's how we kind of broke it out. And what we simply wanted to do is answer the question: how many of those companies from last year actually survived and are still around 1 year later? So here's how the numbers kind of broke out. In the consumable, we had 41, 36 in the beauty and home, 9 in alcohol, tobacco, so forth and so on. So that entertainment, 8%, 0 of them are out of business. They're still all around. But when we look at the consumables, again, consumables should be great in theory around how I talked about marketing to customers, because you're consuming the product, you're going to come back for more. It's the shave club. You're always going to need to shave. You're just going to keep buying the product, and so the risk of cancellation is much lower. Only 8 of them out of business, roughly 10% across the 3 different categories, which is fantastic. But then the non-consumable, 16% out of business, 21% out of business. I wanted to use the skull and crossbones here, but marketing overruled me. So you have to think about it. This is completely informal. I don't know why these people went out of business. Maybe they actually sold to someone else or merged, but they're no longer there. But it does speak, I think, generally to the trend that you have to have a good follow-on concept about what you're going to do with your customers once you've acquired them. If you don't, it's going to be tough to maintain a long-term business. If your goal is to get a business up and running and then sell it to a larger company, fantastic. But keep that in mind as you're thinking about, what are you going to do with your customers once you get them. So I jumped right into predictive modeling. I started showing charts and graphs. I didn't talk about the data. And the data is by and far the most important aspect. Everyone talks about machine learning, artificial intelligence. Those are just techniques. They're a commodity. A person in my shoes as a data scientist, I should never be selling my services that I have a better technique, because everybody has access to the same techniques these days. They're all free. The common person can go online and get access to techniques. The real value is where you're going to get data. And I don't see very many people, especially on the vendor side, talking about data in a very accurate or fair way. There's all kinds of data out there that can be overlaid and understood on consumers and customers. And so I kind of wanted to give you my point of view on it. So I have a signal scarcity on the y-axis and a signal predictiveness on the x-axis. So detailed consumer spend. I joked about how people in the survey world kind of sometimes don't tell the truth about what the particular questions are. Where you open up your wallet and spend money, that you're telling me something real. When you spend money, I know you have an interest in that. It might be a gift, but you still have interest in that personally, in buying that product or that service. So detailed consumer spend, it's very hard to get, but it is the most predictive data that's out there. That data aggregated is still very useful. Online consumer behavior is very useful, but much harder to get, mostly controlled by the big tech firms that are generating the data. And then consumer characteristics, compiled data that's available from a lot of different companies, demographics, lifestyles, and interests. So how does that all break down? Browser intent, search interest, mobile interest data, mostly controlled by Google and Facebook and Pinterest and Microsoft. But you have your own web tracking data. You can understand who's hitting your website, at least anonymously, and understand them. Again, that demographic and lifestyle data. The summarized data, you can get summarized purchase data from companies like Weiland and our competitors, credit card companies. Social media data, mostly a walled garden. You can scrape information from companies like Instagram and Twitter primarily. You're not going to get anything really from Facebook, but there is some very relevant data that can be obtained there. Again, that data is mostly getting scraped and pulled back to an individual by companies like Weiland and our competitors. But then this detailed purchase data, where all the richness really lives. Who's spending money on what? What are you subscribing to? Where do you donate money? And what do you actually spend money on in terms of products and services and travel and things like that? So the value of data, when you think about people talking to you, from the vendor side about, I have data, think about this slide and ask yourself, what kind of data are they really trying to sell me? And how relevant is it for that marketing objective that I talked about early on? How relevant is it for predicting a given response, whether it's a response to a direct mail program or a digital campaign or a Facebook campaign, something along those lines? Understand the data in relation to that marketing objective. So a lot of old school kind of lingo thrown in here about direct mail. How does it all relate? Really what we've been doing in direct mail, decades ago translates. At Weiland, we're kind of a channel agnostic company. The data that we use, the modeling algorithms that we used, all people-based to make predictions. Doesn't matter where you market to them. It was easier on the left-hand side in the old days when you only had a postal address and a home phone landline, you knew who you were marketing to. When you mailed the catalog, the name and address was on the back of the catalog, there was a source code, and you could track it. In today's world of digital advertising, it's much more difficult. It's much more confused. You still have the postal address, and direct mail is still very valuable, and we do a lot of great work there. But in the digital context, individuals have multiple devices. There's desktops, there's mobile phones, and when you're doing advertising in that environment, you might be delivering the same message or even slightly nuanced messages to the same person over and over again, and understanding the frequency by which you do that is very problematic, and in some ways you don't even know it. If you're in Facebook, they often will not even give you that information. They will tell you in aggregate, but they will not tell you how many times you've specifically shown an ad to the same person. So those are issues that you really need to think about. But again, the bottom line of the predictive analytics, building models, making solutions, can be deployed in any channel. We can deliver audiences to direct mail. We can deliver an audience for a Facebook campaign. We can deliver audiences for display advertising. And you can even do things within Google and search by delivering specific audiences as people hit key terms that you're looking for. Another important concept in the digital space to think about, vendors and how they sell audiences and how they're deploying it aren't always aligned very well with you as the marketer. So your goal as an advertiser should be performance. Again, back to that curve. You want to get the biggest bang for your marketing dollar. You want to ultimately have high response rates, acquire a lot of customers. What do vendors want to do? Most vendors are in a CPM type of environment where they're getting paid more money by doing more advertising. Those goals aren't so aligned. It's kind of the fairy tale world where they intersect, right? It's very rare, again, thinking back to that curve, if I blow out volume to the very extreme, my performance is very, very low. So what you need to do is be very critical when you're thinking about doing digital advertising and really understand where you need to be on that curve, and have control over who's spending your money in that context. There's a reality zone that's kind of somewhere in the middle, and I alluded to, and not going to really talk about because we could talk about it all day, the attribution piece. How do you close the loop when you're doing all that digital advertising? How do you understand who you've actually contacted through those anonymous ads, if you're buying display ads programmatically, things along those lines? How do you tie that back effectively to know that you've targeted the right person and you actually drove response that way? It's a very important concept. So Facebook, just wanted to spend a minute or two talking about Facebook because I know a lot of folks are advertising on Facebook. This is actually text from their website or very close to it. This slide was put together a few years ago. I think it reads pretty similar in today's world. They have an introduction to Lookalike Audiences. On the page, they don't talk about predictive modeling. They don't use the term modeling. But what are they doing? They're doing exactly what we've been doing for decades. They're building essentially a profile model. They're letting a user, a non-data scientist in many cases, to actually build a lookalike model using their underlying data. So a lot of the Facebook conversations, why they've been getting a lot of bad press, isn't for the fact that they're doing this. It's more for the data that they're allowing to flow into this type of a tool and how they've acquired that data and maybe have been using that data without the user's consent in all ways. But the technique itself is brilliant. The tool is brilliant. The fact that you can just upload your best customers, your source audiences is the way that they refer to it, and do it in a very automated way using the very best techniques that are out there. It's very powerful, but you need to think about it very carefully when you're using this tool. So they talk about using a source audience of 1,000 to 50,000 people. So what they're saying is you need to look at your customers, understand what customers do I want to emulate or find more like, and then upload them so that they can build a model to compare those people to the rest of the users on Facebook and find more that look like them. If you talk to most statisticians, the devil's in the detail around how you define the customers that you want to be going after. If you only have 5,000 customers, you should probably upload them all. But if you have 50,000, you might want to find the characteristics of the ones that made it through an entire cycle of your boxes, made it past the initial box, and not be trying to emulate and find more people that are going to try your box once and go away. So you need to think critically and not just throw a bunch of records out there, because you're not going to get the precision that you might need. And then there's a lot of other details around choosing that source audience and executing the test. If you did have 50,000 customers and you uploaded only 5,000 of them that made it through the cycle, they might very well serve back to you the other 45,000 that you didn't upload if you didn't upload them and exclude them specifically from your campaign. And also, if you're running other tests at the same time, if you took an audience from a company like Wyland or one of our competitors and uploaded it, and you built an audience this way and you ran the campaign at the same time, you may have a lot of intersection and prioritization issues. So from a statistical point of view, you want to set up your tests appropriately to get the right reads. That's a very important concept. And we've seen a lot of clients kind of do these types of things, get them confused, make bad interpretations, and then they don't have a really good follow-on plan for what they're going to do next. So very important. The same concepts, frankly, hold if you're doing other display advertising, or if you're using Google's similar product where you can create kind of a best customer look within their search tool. You need to think about those things as you're generating those types of models. So finally, I was thinking about the customers, and I heard this quote, and I was thinking, where did this quote come from? I researched it. It was from a UK department store back in the early 1900s. The customer is always right. I encourage you to think about how you can understand who your customers are, what their motivations are, how you can monetize them effectively. But just understand, just because the customer is always right, that doesn't mean that you always have to market to all of your customers. You can critically use predictive modeling, and you can effectively just target to the ones that are going to return you investment. Thank you very much. So I got about a minute or so. If there's any questions? No brave souls wants to talk data science? Thank you.
What's your opinion on the accuracy of prospect digital audiences? We just see a lot of something as simple as gender that can be misinterpreted across some of the prospects.
You mean like on the Facebook or other digital?
Just display in general, build an audience, and it really isn't what you think.
Yeah, I think that there are like literally 80,000 segments that are put out there by all different types of companies in the digital realm, from all the compiled companies to even our own company. Some of them are very precise and some of them are very broad, and it really goes back to that disconnect that I talked about earlier. A lot of them are putting out as big of audiences as possible because they want you to just spend a lot of money against them, because that's how they make money. So I think you really need to think critically. I think there are a lot of great resources for highly targeted audiences that in the digital realm that'll make sense. And frankly, you should have a conversation with companies like ours or other companies in the same space that do targeting, that is people-based. We do it like to the individual, and then we find those people online, as opposed to just using online data that's more anonymized. So it's all white hat, and it's done in the right way, but it starts with identity and then goes to online identity.
We've got about 50,000 customers, and we usually use things like Lookalike Audiences on Facebook or Google. Why would someone come to another company like Wyland and get separate data, and how does that change our marketing?
Yeah, so I believe that if you remember the value of data slide, all of the Facebook data that's being used to generate those audiences is all the type of Facebook activity, right? We at companies like Wyland, we understand who your consumers are beyond just the online activity, but where they're actually spending money. And our value is that we can take all of that data and build more precise audiences than what they can do with their data, and find people based upon the transactions on what they're buying, what other types of subscription box services they're buying, what other type of merchandise, what retail do they buy from, and boil all that together to just like create that more precision in the curve that I showed kind of early on in the presentation.
Thank you. Sorry,
We're out of time?
we are out
All
of
right.
time. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much, Doug. It was
Yep.
wonderful.